This has been a really interesting couple of weeks. Sorry, I usually don't get told to talk louder. This has been a really interesting couple of weeks. I don't think any of us on this board, when we first met at our first public meeting after Newtown, that our conversation about the importance of local action would take us to the point where, as Gail mentioned, people around the country are paying attention to what we are doing. I also didn't count on having a tooth pulled on Monday, so it's been a really interesting couple of days. There are really three questions that I think we need to focus on. And I think that those of you who are from Weston and who have been to our meetings in the past have heard me say that when I vote, it should be extremely clear as to what my thought process was and why I have voted the way I did. I will never cast a vote that is not transparent. So in thinking about how to face this question, this topic, I really want to focus on three questions. The first question is now the time for the topic of additional gun control measures to be addressed? The second question is, do we as selectmen have the ability to address this topic? And third, what are the right steps, if any, for the town of Weston to take? And I'll address them in that order. First question, is now the right time for the topic of additional gun control measures to be addressed? Well, I look at the statistics. I work in the finance industry and I look at numbers. And I know that there are some who will not agree with these numbers or how I will present them, but they are facts. In 2011, so a year and a half ago, the year ending December 31, 2011, there were 12,664 total murders in the United States, of which 8,583 were by firearm. Of that total, 8,500, 6,220 were by handgun, 323 by rifle. When we add to that number the number of people who use a gun for suicide, the number comes out to be 32 gun murders and nearly 90 gun deaths every day of the year. Think about those numbers, 32 gun murders and 90 gun deaths every day of the year. The interesting fact that I think is important to note is that 80% of gun deaths are with weapons that have been legally acquired. Not necessarily being used by the person who's acquired them, and that's an important distinction. I think it's important to note, as Gail alluded, that major changes in the way that society addresses important topics often begin in local communities just like this. If you look back at the history of the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, the growth of resistance to the Vietnam War, it was discussions in churches and synagogues and schools that then went out to the community, to the county, and to the state, and to the national level. At our first discussion, at our first meeting when the discussion of this topic started, the three of us agreed that the conversation must be started locally in the desire that the sentiment would bubble up to the state and national level. Well, things have happened extremely quickly. As shown by the President's focus on gun violence through Vice President Biden's commission, by Governor Malloy's advisory commission, by the Connecticut General Assembly's Gun Violence Prevention and Children's Safety Task Force, by the New York Secure and Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act, by the Active Role of Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and countless other advocacy groups across the country, we are perhaps now at a point where the majority pushes its local and national leaders to adopt a new approach to the ongoing tragedy of gun violence. I was doing a little bit of thinking and digging on the internet to try to find some arguments that would support the view that it is appropriate to talk about this topic now. I came upon an article published in the Southern Medical Journal about 3 years ago, in February 2010. I follow a statement. Firearm-related violence vastly increases expenditures for health care, services for the disabled, insurance, and our criminal justice system. It added that the dangers of having a gun at home far outweigh the safety benefits. Research shows that access to guns greatly increases the risk of death and firearm-related violence. A gun in the home is 12 times more likely to result in the death of a household member or visitor than an intruder. The same journal in the same article continued. Firearms are the most commonly used weapons in domestic homicide, accounting for about 65% of all deaths. They increase the risk of intimate partner homicide fivefold. Having a gun in the home results in loss of life to women by suicide 3 times more often than where no such weapon is available. I looked at a situation in Australia, and again, they went much further than anyone here is talking about. They had a very unfortunate mass shooting in 1996, and the government of Australia was able to enact a law banning the sale, importation, and possession of semi-automatic rifles, and removed 700,000 guns from circulation. In the 18 years before 1996, there were 13 mass shootings in Australia. In the 10 years following 1996, there was 0. Now, that is going much further than anyone in this country has talked about with actual confiscation of weapons. And I personally am very concerned at the attempt by many of the people who decided to write to us, and those the organizations on whose behest they were writing. They continue to ascribe gun deaths to the following: mental illness, drug abuse, the absence of God in schools, poor parenting, and non-Americans making rules. And never once acknowledged that access to guns may, just may, be a factor in this tragic annual statistic. The second question which I posed and thought about is whether we as selectmen have the ability to address this topic. And I think here, the answer is a resounding yes. Article 3 of the Constitution establishes the Supreme Court as the ultimate legal authority in the United States, and it has the final word on the interpretation of the Constitution. I would hope that those who feel strongly about this issue accept, as we do up here, that we're not really entitled to our own interpretation of the Constitution. We leave that to the Supreme Court as the final arbiter, and we adhere to it whether we like it or not. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Second Amendment in its Heller decision in 2008. The majority opinion written by Justice Scalia struck down a ban on handguns kept in the home for self-defense in Washington, D.C. I may not like Justice Scalia's decision and find that I identify more with the minority opinions of Justice Stevens and Justice Breyer. However, Heller is the law of the land, and the Weston Board of Selectmen will undertake no activities regarding guns that conflict with Justice Scalia's ruling in Heller. Nothing we do should be interpreted to limit the right of citizens to own weapons for self-protection in their homes. Scalia also states that the right to own guns is not absolute. The Second Amendment should not be understood as conferring, quote, a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose, unquote. His decision also contained a list of laws and regulations that would be unaffected. Quote, nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill. Government buildings may also ban guns. The Supreme Court has no issue with, quote, laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of weapons, unquote. And he added that laws banning dangerous and unusual weapons, his words, are, quote, another important limitation on the right to keep and carry arms. And he gave an example of M16 rifles and the like. He also suggested that other kinds of weapons and ammunition could be regulated, stating, quote, I don't know that a lot of people have machine guns or armor-piercing bullets. I think that's quite unusual. In October 2012, then retired Justice Stevens said, even as generously construed in Heller, the Second Amendment provides no obstacle to regulations prohibiting the ownership or use of the sorts of automatic weapons used in the tragic multiple killings in Virginia, Colorado, and Arizona in recent years. The failure of Congress to take action to minimize the risk of similar tragedies in the future cannot be blamed on the court's decision in Heller. In looking at what we can do at the state level, I look at Connecticut General Statute Section 7-148, the scope of municipal powers, which gives us the authority to act in matters of public safety. It reads specifically, quote, to define, prohibit, and abate within the municipality all nuisances and causes thereof, and all things detrimental to the health, morals, safety, convenience, and welfare of its inhabitants. There have been two cases that I think are relevant that are much more recent than the Heller decision, both decided by the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Second District, in which we fall. In the case of United States versus De Castro, which was decided in June of last year, the court said, heightened scrutiny is appropriate only as to those firearms regulations that substantially burden the Second Amendment. Heightened scrutiny is triggered only by those restrictions that operate as a substantial burden on the ability of law-abiding citizens to possess and use a firearm for self-defense or for other lawful purpose. Law that regulates the availability of firearms is not a substantial burden on the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms if adequate alternatives remain for law-abiding citizens to acquire a firearm for self-defense. Laws that have, quote, only a de minimis effect on the right to bear arms, or that do not, quote, meaningfully affect individual self-defense, do not impinge on the Second Amendment right, and therefore do not warrant heightened security, or scrutiny, excuse me. And in a more recent case, also decided at the same Court of Appeals in November of last year, in the case Kichalski versus County of Westchester, they stated in the opinion, Heller explains that the core protection of the Second Amendment is the right of law-abiding, responsible citizens to use arms in defense of hearth and home. We believe that applying less than strict scrutiny when the regulation does not burden the core protection of self-defense in the home makes eminent sense, and is in line with the approach taken by our sister circuits. They continued, while the state's ability to regulate firearms is circumscribed in the home, outside the home, firearm rights have always been more limited because public safety interests often outweigh individual interests in self-defense. There is a long-standing tradition of states regulating firearm possession and use in public because of the dangers posed to public safety. I think it's important to point out one thing, then I'll hit the third question. Many of us received this nice little postcard. I have to say, it's the first time I've ever had my name on both sides of the postcard, both addressed to me and then saying to call me and register a complaint.
That's not true. I did that on our campaign.
Oh, sorry. The ordinance that was picked up, and I think we perhaps should have started this way, the ordinance that has copies over here dates back to 1990. And many of the issues raised in emails to us about what we are attempting to put in place are not what we're trying to put in place. They've been in existence for the last 22 years because they're taken straight from the 1990 ordinance. So the people have expressed concerns that we're banning all firearms, that we're taking firearms out of the home. And we're talking about slingshots and crossbows. All that wording comes from the 1990 ordinance, which has been in place in this town for 22 years. What this board is trying to do is take a look at that ordinance, to update it to 2013, and to deal with issues that we think are important. The final question I want to address is, what are the right steps, if any, for the town to take? In watching the memorial service in Newtown, one comment that President Obama made really stuck with me. He asked, are we prepared to say that such violence visited on our children year after year after year is somehow the price of our freedom? And I feel extremely strongly that we do not need to choose between the protection of gun ownership and the prevention of gun violence. I think that those two can work symbiotically. They can work well together. I believe that local communities must face this issue head on. However, we do need to recognize that the discussion is evolving extremely quickly at the state and national level, and that our efforts may be best served for our own purposes and for those of the town that we've been elected to represent by looking and taking a step back and saying, if the state is acting, if the federal government is acting, if neighboring states are acting, perhaps some of the things that we have looked to do are best put on hold or put on the back burner so that the steps that we look to take are in agreement with what's being done at the national level and at the state level. I don't know that we're there yet. I think the important part about coming here this evening is to listen to comments. But I would second Gail's comment at the end that we do what we think is best for the town. That's why people elect us. I've had many people write to me and tell me that I should be voted out of office. Well, you know, I'm a volunteer here. I have another job all day. I do what I think is best for this town, and if the loss of my position as an elected official is the price of getting something sensible in place, then I will gladly not continue to serve in town government.